boy cries in freezing supermarket parking lot until this man arrives like an angel. Ethan Miller, just 8 years old, was sitting on the cold ground of the Safeway supermarket parking lot in eastern Brooklyn, clutching a crumpled piece of paper in his small hands. Tears streamed down his face as the icy December wind cut through his thin t-shirt. It was in this moment of despair that Michael Thompson, a 30-year-old man who had just finished his weekly grocery shopping, heard the child's sobs echoing between the cars. Carrying 2 heavy bags, he stopped and looked around, trying to locate the source of the heartbreaking sounds of distress. "Hey, kid, are you okay?" Michael asked, approaching slowly, careful not to scare the boy further. Ethan lifted his red, swollen eyes, wiped his nose on his sleeve, and shook his head. The man noticed the boy was trembling, not just from the cold, but from fear. "Where are your parents?" Michael continued, setting the bags down and crouching to meet the child's eye level. "My dad, he said he'd be back in 10 minutes, Ethan said, his voice shaky. "But it's been so long, and his car isn't here anymore." Michael glanced around and realized the parking lot was nearly empty in that area. The cold was bitter for early evening, and few people were out shopping at that hour. "How long have you been waiting here?" Michael asked, his chest tightening. "I don't know." "A long time." "It was still light when he left me, and now it's dark," Ethan replied, pointing at the sky where the first evening stars had appeared. A chill ran down Michael's spine. It was almost 7 at night, and if the boy had been there since daylight, that meant he'd been alone in the cold for at least 2 hours. "What's your dad's name?" "Let's try calling him," Michael suggested, pulling out his phone. "Robert Wilson Miller. But he doesn't have a phone." "He sold it last week," Ethan said, lowering his head in shame. Michael sensed something strange about the situation. No father would leave his 8-year-old son alone in a parking lot for so long, especially in the cold. There was more to this. "Ethan, can I see that paper you're holding?" Michael asked gently. The boy hesitated, but then handed over the crumpled note. Michael carefully unfolded it and felt his heart race as he read the words. It wasn't a grocery list. It was a letter. "Ethan, my son, if you're reading this, Daddy had to leave for a while. You're a strong, smart boy. Ask good people for help. Uncle Michael, who always shops here on Tuesdays, will take care of you. Daddy loves you more than anything in the world." Michael read the letter 3 times, trying to process it. How did this man know his name? How did he know Michael shopped here on Tuesdays? And most importantly, where was Ethan's father now? "Ethan, has your dad seen me before?" "Dad?" Michael asked, fighting to stay calm. "Daddy always said you seemed like a good person, that you always helped Mrs. Dorothy carry her groceries to her car," Ethan answered, wiping away another tear. Michael remembered the elderly woman he often saw at the supermarket. He had always helped her with her heavy bags, but that didn't explain how Ethan's father knew his name. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now back to the story. Just then, Kevin, the supermarket security guard, approached them. Michael recognized him from his shopping trips. They always exchanged greetings. "Good evening, Mr. Michael. I noticed you were talking to the boy. Can I help with anything?" asked Kevin, looking worriedly at Ethan. "Kevin, did you see this child's father today?" asked Michael, showing the letter to the security guard. Kevin quickly read it and shook his head, concerned. "Yes, I did. A tall, thin man with longish black hair. He arrived here around 5 in the evening with the boy. I saw when they got out of an old blue Honda Civic. The man seemed nervous, looking around everywhere," Kevin recounted. "And then?" Michael pressed. "Then he ran off, Mr. Michael. I got a call on my phone and he just took off, left the car running and everything. The boy was there in front of the market, but when I looked back, he had come over here to the parking lot," explained Kevin. Ethan listened silently, but Michael could tell the boy knew more than he was saying. "Ethan, did your father say anything to you before he left? Anything you haven't told us yet?" Michael asked, sitting on the ground beside the boy. Ethan looked at the 2 men and then lowered his head. "Daddy cried before he left me here. He said he loved me very much and that he had to take care of something really important. He said if he didn't come back, I had to stay with you, Uncle Michael," Ethan said, starting to cry again. Michael's stomach twisted. The situation was far more serious than he'd imagined. The boy's father had planned to leave him there, knew who Michael was and where to find him. But why? "Kevin, can you stay with Ethan for a few minutes? I'll go to the supermarket management to see if we can find anything about the car," Michael said, standing up. "No," Ethan shouted, grabbing Michael's hand. "Please don't leave me alone. Daddy said to stay with you." Michael's heart ached at the desperation in the boy's eyes. How could he leave him there after everything that had happened? "All right, Ethan. I won't leave you alone. We'll all go together to talk to the supermarket staff," Michael said, helping the boy up. When they entered the supermarket, Michael noticed Ethan was trembling even more. The boy stared at the shelves full of food, with an expression Michael recognized immediately: hunger. "Ethan, when was the last time you ate something?" Michael asked, stopping at the entrance. "This morning, Daddy made coffee with bread. But there was no butter, just plain bread," Ethan replied softly. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady his emotions. This child had been hungry for hours, alone in the cold, not knowing where his father was. "Come on, let's get you something to eat first, then we'll talk to management," Michael said, taking Ethan's small hand. They walked to the supermarket bakery, and Michael bought a hot sandwich and juice for Ethan. The boy ate with a heartbreaking urgency, as if unsure when his next meal would be. While Ethan ate, Michael took the chance to ask Kevin for more details. "Kevin, you said you saw the man get a call. Did you hear anything from the conversation?" Michael asked. "I heard him say, 'I know,' over and over. Then he said, 'Please don't do this,' and started crying. That's when he ran off," Kevin said, lowering his voice. Michael began piecing together a theory. Maybe Ethan's father was being blackmailed or threatened. That would explain the nervousness, the plan to leave Ethan with him, and the sudden disappearance. "Ethan, does your father have any trouble with someone? A debt or something like that?" Michael asked carefully. Ethan stopped eating and looked at Michael with wide eyes. "Daddy said some bad men wanted to take me away from him, that they said I wasn't really his son," said Ethan, starting to cry again. Michael felt a chill in his stomach. The situation was getting much more complicated. Custody issues, documentation, maybe even an irregular adoption. It was all starting to make sense. "Ethan, do you remember your mother?" Michael asked gently. "Mommy left when I was little. Daddy said she got sick and had to go far away to take care of herself. He had a picture of her in his wallet, but he lost it last week," Ethan explained. Michael and Kevin exchanged glances. The story was getting stranger by the minute. A single father, struggling financially, losing documents, being threatened over custody, and now missing. Just then, Mrs. Dorothy, the elderly woman Michael always helped, approached the group. "Michael, my dear, it's so good to see you. Who is this little boy?" she asked, looking kindly at Ethan. "Mrs. Dorothy, it's a complicated situation. This boy's father disappeared and left a letter saying to look for me," Michael explained. Mrs. Dorothy sat beside Ethan and took his small hands in hers. "Sweetheart, what's your name?" she asked in that sweet voice only grandmothers have. "Ethan Miller, ma'am," the boy replied, calmer in her presence. "Ethan, what a beautiful name. Did you know Ethan is the name of an angel?" Mrs. Dorothy said, smiling. Ethan smiled for the first time since Michael had found him. "Mrs. Dorothy, do you know Ethan's father, Robert Wilson Miller?" Michael asked. Robert Wilson, Mrs. Dorothy repeated thoughtfully. "Tall, thin man, always looking worried, buys the cheapest things." "That's him," Ethan confirmed. "Oh yes, I know him. He comes here often, but about 2 weeks ago he seemed very strange. The other day I saw him talking to some men in suits out in the parking lot. It looked like an argument," Mrs. Dorothy shared. Michael felt they were getting closer to the truth. Men in suits weren't common in the neighborhood where this Safeway was. They were probably lawyers, social workers, or worse, people involved in something shady. "Ethan, did your dad ever say anything about documents, about your birth certificate or anything like that?" Michael asked. Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "Daddy was always looking for some papers. He said he lost important documents when we moved last year. He said some men wanted to see them to prove I was really his son." Michael began to understand. There was likely an issue with Ethan's documentation, maybe an adoption that was never finalized, and someone was using it to blackmail Robert Wilson. "Kevin, can you help me check the security cameras? Maybe we can find out where Ethan's father went," Michael asked. "Of course, Michael. Let's go to the security room," Kevin agreed. Mrs. Dorothy offered to stay with Ethan while they checked the footage. Michael hesitated, but Ethan agreed to stay with the kind woman who had been so gentle with him. In the security room, Michael and Kevin watched the recordings from earlier that afternoon. They saw when Robert Wilson arrived with Ethan, nervous and constantly looking around. They saw when he got the call and how his expression changed completely. But the most important thing was what they saw next. When Robert Wilson ran out, he wasn't alone. A black car was waiting for him across the street. Two men got out, spoke quickly with him, and then they all got into the car and drove away. "This isn't good, Mr. Michael," said Kevin, shaking his head. "Not at all." "It looks like Ethan's father was taken by force," Michael agreed. When they returned to where Ethan and Mrs. Dorothy were, they found the two chatting animatedly. Ethan was telling the older woman about his school and how much he loved to draw. "Michael, I need to tell you something," Mrs. Dorothy said, pulling him aside. "Ethan told me they've been living in their car for weeks. His father lost his job, then lost their home." Michael felt his heart grow even heavier. Robert Wilson's situation was far worse than he'd imagined. No job, no home, living in a car with an 8-year-old son, and now being blackmailed over documentation issues. "Ethan, where did you keep your clothes and belongings?" Michael asked, stepping closer to the boy. "Daddy rented a tiny room just for our things. He said it was cheaper than paying rent for a house," Ethan explained. "Do you know where that place is?" Michael asked. "Yeah, it's near Grandma Mildred's house, Daddy's mom. But Grandma doesn't talk to Daddy anymore," Ethan said sadly. Michael had an idea. Maybe Ethan's grandmother knew something about the documentation problem, or perhaps she could take care of Ethan while they figured out where Robert Wilson was. "Ethan, would you like to go to your grandma's house?" Michael asked. Ethan shook his head firmly. "Grandma doesn't like me. She always told Daddy I wasn't really her grandson," he said, tears welling up again. Michael felt anger toward Ethan's grandmother. How could an older woman reject such a sweet child over paperwork? But maybe she knew important details about the situation. "Ethan, even if your grandma isn't very kind, she might know where your dad is. You won't have to stay with her. I'll be right there with you," Michael said. Ethan thought for a moment, then nodded. Mrs. Dorothy offered to come along, and the four left the Safeway supermarket, heading toward Ethan's grandmother's neighborhood. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now back to the story. Mrs. Mildred's house was on a quiet street in the Queens neighborhood. It was a modest but well-kept home with a small front garden. When Michael rang the doorbell, a woman in her 60s answered. She looked at Ethan with surprise and irritation. "What's this child doing here?" Mrs. Mildred asked, not even greeting them. "Good evening, ma'am. My name is Michael. I'm here because I found Ethan alone at the supermarket. Your son, Robert Wilson, has disappeared," Michael explained, trying to stay polite. Mrs. Mildred glared at Ethan, then at Michael, clearly annoyed. "I warned my son this would cause trouble. He can't go around pretending to be the father of a child who isn't his," Mrs. Mildred said, crossing her arms. "What do you mean, not his son?" Michael asked, shocked. "Robert Wilson found that boy abandoned when he was just 2. Brought him home saying he'd take care of him, never formalized the adoption, never did the paperwork right. Now he's paying the price," Mrs. Mildred said, showing no affection toward Ethan. Ethan listened silently, but Michael could see tears in the boy's eyes. Learning he'd been abandoned so young and that his own grandmother rejected him was too much for a child. "Mrs. Mildred, regardless of the paperwork, Ethan is a child who needs help. Your son disappeared today, and we're trying to find him," Michael said, appealing to the woman's humanity. "My son got into trouble because of this boy. Some men came here yesterday looking for the child's documents. They said the biological family wants him back," said Mrs. Mildred. Michael felt he was finally uncovering the truth. Ethan's biological family had shown up, and was trying to reclaim custody of the child. Robert Wilson, without legal adoption papers, had no way to defend himself. "Do you know who these people are?" asked Michael. "All I know is they said the boy's birth mother left an inheritance for him. That's why they want him back," replied Mrs. Mildred. The story was becoming clearer. It wasn't love for Ethan that motivated the biological family. It was money, the inheritance his mother had left. "Mom, can Ethan come in to use the bathroom? It's freezing out here," asked Mrs. Dorothy, who had been silent until then. Mrs. Mildred hesitated, but eventually let Ethan inside. While the boy was in the bathroom, Michael took the opportunity to talk further with the grandmother. "Mrs. Mildred, your son loves that boy very much. Anyone can see that. It's not fair for a family that abandoned Ethan to show up now just because of money," said Michael. "The problem isn't what I think, the problem is the law. Robert Wilson never formalized the adoption. Legally, he has no rights to the boy," explained Mrs. Mildred. "But 6 years of living together, of care, of love, does that mean nothing?" Michael asked indignantly. "To the courts, all that matters is paperwork," Mrs. Mildred replied curtly. When Ethan returned from the bathroom, Michael noticed the boy looked even sadder. He had probably overheard part of the conversation. "Ethan, are you okay?" Michael asked, kneeling to meet the boy's height. "Uncle Michael, if Dad doesn't come back, will I have to go live with people I don't know?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. Michael didn't know how to answer. Legally, if the biological family could prove their rights, Ethan would have to go with them. But how do you explain that to an 8-year-old? "Ethan, let's not think about that now. First, we'll find your dad," Michael said, hugging the boy. Mrs. Mildred watched them from the doorway, and Michael could see that despite her sternness, she wasn't completely indifferent to Ethan's pain. "Ma'am, if you know anything about where your son might be, please let us know." "Ethan needs his father," Michael pleaded. "All I know is he said he'd try to fix everything today, that he'd do whatever it took not to lose the boy," Mrs. Mildred said, her voice softening slightly. Michael took out a piece of paper and wrote his phone number for Mrs. Mildred. Then he took Ethan's hand, and the three of them said their goodbyes. On the way back, Mrs. Dorothy suggested they go to the rented room where Robert Wilson kept the family's belongings. Maybe there they'd find a clue about his whereabouts. The room was at the back of a house in the Astoria neighborhood. The homeowner, an older man named Mr. Gerald, greeted them at the gate. "Good evening. We're looking for Robert Wilson Miller. He rents a room here to store his things," Michael explained. "Ah, Robert Wilson. He came by this afternoon, very upset. Took a few things and left," said Mr. Gerald. "Could you show us the room?" "We're family friends," Michael requested. Mr. Gerald led them to the small room at the back of the house. It was a tiny space, just a few cardboard boxes, old clothes, and some of Ethan's toys. Michael searched through the boxes, looking for documents or anything that might hint at Robert Wilson's location. In one of the boxes, he found some official papers, including a copy of Ethan's birth certificate. "Ethan, come here, please," Michael called, examining the document. Ethan approached, and Michael showed him the birth certificate. "Ethan, did you know your full name is Ethan Davis Miller?" Michael asked. "No, Dad always just called me Ethan Miller," the boy replied, confused. Michael looked more closely at the certificate. The mother's name was Jennifer Harris Davis, and where the father's name should have been, it read, "Father not declared." "Ethan, do you remember anything about your mother? Any stories your dad told you?" Michael asked. "Dad said Mom was very young when I was born, that she couldn't take care of me because she was too young and had no family to help," Ethan shared. Michael kept searching through the papers and found something puzzling. A receipt from a funeral home dated 2 years earlier, with Jennifer Harris Davis's name on it. If Ethan's mother had passed away 2 years ago, how could his biological family now be claiming rights over him? Something didn't add up. "Mr. Gerald, did Robert Wilson say anything when he came to pick up his things?" Michael asked. "He said some men were after him because of an inheritance that doesn't exist. He said they'd figure out it was all a lie, but until then, they might hurt the boy," Gerald explained. Michael began to understand. Someone was likely running a scam, pretending to be Ethan's biological family to access a supposed inheritance. Robert Wilson had found out and was now being pursued. "Ethan, Did your dad say anything about an inheritance? Michael asked. Dad said some men told him Mum left money for me, but Dad said it was a lie that Mum didn't have any money, Ethan explained. The situation was becoming clearer and more dangerous. If someone was willing to blackmail and possibly kidnap Robert Wilson over this scam, Ethan could also be at risk. Michael made a decision. They needed to go to the police station and report Robert Wilson's disappearance. But first, he wanted to make sure Ethan was safe. Mrs. Dorothy, could you keep Ethan at your place tonight? I'm going to the police station to report his father's disappearance, Michael asked. Of course, dear. Ethan can stay with me. I have a pull-out couch that'll be perfect for him, Mrs. Dorothy agreed. Ethan seemed scared at the idea of staying in an unfamiliar house, but Michael reassured him, saying he'd be back first thing in the morning. At the police station, Michael told the whole story to the detective. He showed the letter Robert Wilson had left, mentioned the men in suits seen on the security cameras, and explained the supposed biological family claiming rights over Ethan. Detective William Jacobs listened carefully and took notes. Mr. Michael, this is a complex situation involving family matters and possible extortion. We'll file a report and start the investigation, the detective said. Detective, Ethan is safe for now, but I'm worried these people might try to take him too, Michael said. We'll issue an alert for all patrol cars to look for Robert Wilson and the black car you saw on the cameras, and we'll look into this biological family story, the detective promised. By the time Michael left the station, it was past midnight. He was exhausted but knew he wouldn't sleep, not with Robert Wilson in danger, and Ethan living through the worst moment of his life. When he arrived at Mrs. Dorothy's house, he found Ethan still awake, sitting by the window. Ethan, why aren't you sleeping? Michael asked, sitting beside the boy. I'm waiting for Dad to come back. He always tucks me in before I go to sleep, Ethan said, his eyes filled with tears. Michael hugged Ethan and felt the enormous responsibility he had taken on. That child had lost everything, his home, his stability, and now his father. And Michael had become the only source of security Ethan had left. Ethan, I promise we'll find your father. But right now, you need to rest. Tomorrow will be a long day, said Michael. Ethan nodded and lay down on the pull-out sofa Mrs. Dorothy had prepared. Michael stayed a few more minutes talking with the elderly woman. Michael, you're an angel in that boy's life. I've never seen a child so in need of help, said Mrs. Dorothy. Mrs. Dorothy, I don't know why, but I feel Ethan and Robert Wilson came into my life for a reason. I can't abandon them now, Michael replied. The next morning, Michael woke up early and returned to Mrs. Dorothy's house. Ethan was already awake and had eaten breakfast. The woman had been very kind to the boy, even lending him clothes from a grandson who had left some at her place. Michael, I need to tell you something, said Mrs. Dorothy, calling him into the kitchen. Ethan talked in his sleep all night. He called for his father and said, Daddy, don't leave without me. Michael's heart ached. Ethan was traumatized by abandonment and the fear of never seeing his father again. Just then, Michael's phone rang. It was Detective Jacobs. Michael, we have news. We found the abandoned black car in the Bronx. Inside were documents that might be important for the case, said the detective. And Robert Wilson? Michael asked anxiously. We haven't found him yet, but we're following some leads. Can you come to the station? I need you to look at the documents we found, the detective requested. Michael took Ethan with him to the station. The boy didn't want to be apart from him for even a minute. At the station, the detective showed Michael a folder with documents from the abandoned car. There were contracts, certificates, and a stack of papers that looked forged. Michael, these men were running a complex scam. They falsified documents for families who had lost children and then targeted irregularly adopted kids. They'd claim custody and later offer a settlement for money, the detective explained. So there's no biological family looking for Ethan? Michael asked. No. Ethan was truly abandoned as a child, and Robert Wilson took him in even without legal formalities. These scammers exploited that legal vulnerability to extort money, the detective confirmed. Michael felt a mix of relief and worry. Ethan wouldn't be taken by strangers, but Robert Wilson was still missing. Detective, do we have any leads on where Robert Wilson might be? Michael asked. "We're investigating. We also found a phone in the car that could give us important clues," said the detective. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out." Now, back to the story. While waiting for more information, Michael took Ethan to grab something to eat. The boy was clearly stressed and exhausted. "Ethan, are you scared?" Michael asked as they ate at a diner near the station. "I'm scared I'll never see Daddy again." "And I'm scared you'll leave me too," Ethan whispered. Michael took Ethan's small hand. "Ethan, I won't leave you. No matter what happens, I'll stay with you until we find your father. And even after that, I'll still be your friend," Michael promised. Ethan smiled for the first time in 2 days. Just then, Michael's phone rang again. It was the detective. "Michael, we need you back at the station immediately. We have important information," said the detective. When they arrived at the police station, they found the detective with a serious expression, though not necessarily a bad one. "Michael, we managed to trace the phone that was in the car and found out where the scammers were keeping Robert Wilson," the detective said. "Is he okay?" Michael asked anxiously. "He's alive but very shaken. He's at the hospital being examined. The scammers held him captive, trying to force him to sign documents granting them custody of Ethan," the detective explained. Ethan didn't fully understand what the detective was saying, but he grasped that his father was alive and they would see him. "Can we go to the hospital now?" Michael asked. "Yes, you can. He's at City Memorial Hospital, Ward 3, Room 307, the detective replied. On the way to the hospital, Michael tried to prepare Ethan for what they might find. Robert Wilson would likely be very shaken and possibly injured. "Ethan, your father has been through a lot. He might be sad or scared. But the important thing is, he's alive, and you'll be together again," Michael said. When they arrived at the hospital, they found Robert Wilson lying in bed with some bruises on his face, but conscious and seemingly okay. When he saw Ethan, his eyes filled with tears. "Ethan, my boy!" Robert Wilson cried, reaching out his arms. Ethan ran to the bed and threw himself into his father's embrace. The two cried together for several minutes, while Michael watched, moved. "Daddy, I thought you'd abandoned me," Ethan said, still hugging his father. "Never, my son, never. Daddy just wanted to protect you from those bad men. But I'd never leave you," Robert Wilson said, kissing Ethan's head. Robert Wilson looked at Michael gratefully. "You must be Michael. Ethan's told me about you. Thank you for taking care of my son," he said. "Robert Wilson, Ethan is a very special boy. It was my pleasure to help him," Michael replied. Robert Wilson explained that the scammers had kept him in an abandoned house, trying to force him to sign papers that would grant them legal custody of Ethan. Their plan was to later sell that custody to families looking to adopt, charging high fees. They said, if I didn't sign, they'd take Ethan by force. "That's why I left him with you. I knew you'd protect him," Robert Wilson explained. "How did you know you could trust me?" Michael asked, curious. "Because I'd been watching you for months at the Safeway supermarket. I saw how you treated people, especially the elderly and children. I knew you were a good man," Robert Wilson said. Michael was moved to learn that his everyday kindness had been noticed and had saved a family. The doctor came to examine Robert Wilson and said he could be discharged by the end of the day. The bruises weren't serious and he was physically fine. "But where will you stay?" Michael asked, remembering they had been living in the car that had been sold. Robert Wilson lowered his head, ashamed. "I don't know, Michael. I lost my job, lost our home, sold the car. We have nowhere to go," he said. Ethan listened silently, processing that they were homeless. "Robert Wilson, you can stay at my apartment for now. I have a pull-out couch, and it's no trouble at all," Michael offered. "I can't accept that. You've already done so much for us," Robert Wilson said. "Robert Wilson, Ethan has been through too much trauma already. He needs stability now, and you need time to get back on your feet. Please accept," Michael insisted. Ethan looked at his father with pleading eyes. "Daddy, Uncle Michael is really nice. Can we stay with him?" he asked. Robert Wilson looked at his son and then at Michael, finally nodding. Just until we can get things sorted out, Robert Wilson said. When they left the hospital, Michael took Robert Wilson and Ethan to his apartment. It was a simple two-bedroom apartment in Eastern Brooklyn. Ethan was impressed by the size and cleanliness of the place. "Wow, Uncle Michael, you live alone in such a big place?" asked Ethan, exploring the apartment. "I sure do, Ethan, but now we have company," replied Michael, smiling. That night, the three of them had dinner together. Michael had prepared a simple but hearty meal. Ethan ate with gusto, while Robert Wilson was still clearly shaken by the events of the past few days. "Michael, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for us," said Robert Wilson. "Robert Wilson, sometimes people come into our lives for a reason. Maybe I needed you as much as you needed me," Michael replied. Ethan fell asleep on the couch during the conversation, and Robert Wilson carried him to the room Michael had prepared. "Michael, I need to sort out Ethan's paperwork. I can't risk going through this again," said Robert Wilson when he returned to the living room. "I work in administration at a small company, but I have some contacts who might help. We'll figure this out together," Michael promised. In the following days, Michael helped Robert Wilson reach out to a family law attorney. The attorney, Christopher, explained that Ethan's situation could be resolved through a late-stage adoption process. "Robert Wilson, you've lived with Ethan for 6 years. That's more than enough time to establish a parent-child relationship. We'll get the adoption formalized," assured attorney Christopher. Ethan listened to the conversations without fully understanding the legal terms, but he could tell the adults were working to make sure he and Robert Wilson could stay together forever. During this time, Michael also helped Robert Wilson look for a job. His company needed a general services assistant, and Michael managed to recommend Robert Wilson for the position. "Michael, you don't have to do this," said Robert Wilson. "Robert Wilson, you're an honest worker who's been through tough times. You deserve a chance," Michael replied. On Robert Wilson's first day of work, Ethan was nervous. He was still afraid his father might disappear again. "Daddy's coming back, right, Uncle Michael?" asked Ethan as they had breakfast. "Of course he is, Ethan. Your dad's going to work, and then he'll come home." "Every day," Michael reassured him. Ethan went to school for the first time in weeks. Michael had managed to transfer him to a public school near his apartment. The boy was excited, but also nervous. "Ethan, if you need anything during the day, the principal has my number," said Michael as he dropped him off. At the end of the day, Michael picked Ethan up from school, and then they went to get Robert Wilson from work. Ethan ran to hug his father, still afraid he might not be there. "How was your first day at work, Daddy?" asked Ethan. "It was great, son." "And how was your first day at your new school?" asked Robert Wilson. "I liked it. The teacher said I draw really well," Ethan said proudly. That night, the three of them had dinner together again. Ethan was livelier, and Robert Wilson seemed more relaxed. The routine was bringing stability to all of them. "Michael, how can we ever repay you for all this?" asked Robert Wilson. "Robert Wilson, seeing you happy and safe is repayment enough," Michael replied. A few weeks later, the attorney called with good news. Ethan's adoption process was moving quickly, and there were no legal obstacles. "In 2 months, Ethan will officially be Robert Wilson's son in the eyes of the law," announced attorney Christopher. Ethan didn't fully understand, but he saw everyone was happy, and they celebrated with a cake Michael had bought. A month later, Robert Wilson had saved enough to rent a small apartment in the same neighborhood as Michael. It was simple, but it would be the first official home Ethan would have since they left the old house. "Uncle Michael, will you still be our friend even if you live far away?" asked Ethan, worried. "Ethan, I'll always be your friend. And it's not far. I'll only be 2 blocks from here," Michael assured him. On moving day, Michael helped Robert Wilson and Ethan settle into the new apartment. Ethan was thrilled about having his own room, even if it was small. "Dad, can we invite Uncle Michael for dinner tomorrow?" Ethan asked. "Of course, son. Michael will always be welcome in our home," Robert Wilson agreed. 2 months later, the day of the final adoption hearing arrived. Ethan was nervous, wearing the nicest clothes they could afford. "Ethan, after today, you'll officially be my son in the eyes of the law," Robert Wilson explained. "But I'm already your son, Dad," Ethan said, confused. "That's true, son. But now no one will ever be able to question it, Robert Wilson replied, emotional. At the hearing, the judge asked Ethan a few simple questions about his life with Robert Wilson. The boy answered with confidence and affection, making clear the strong bond between them. "Ethan, do you want Robert Wilson to remain your father?" the judge asked. "He's always been my dad, Your Honor, for as long as I can remember," Ethan answered. The judge smiled and declared the adoption official. Robert Wilson cried with emotion, and Ethan hugged his father, happy to see him so joyful. Michael was at the hearing as a witness and was also moved to see the family finally legally recognized. After the hearing, the three celebrated at a pizzeria. Ethan was radiant, understanding that now no one could ever separate him from his father. "Uncle Michael, thank you for helping us stay together," Ethan said, hugging Michael. "Ethan, thank you for teaching me what a real family is," Michael replied, emotional. 6 months later, life had completely stabilized. Ethan was doing well in school and had made new friends in the neighborhood. Robert Wilson had been promoted at work and received a raise that allowed for a more comfortable life. Michael remained a constant presence in their lives. They had dinner together at least twice a week, and Ethan considered him a true uncle. "Michael, have you ever thought about having your own family?" Robert Wilson asked one evening. "Sometimes I do. But you've taught me that family isn't just about blood. You're my family too," Michael answered. Ethan was growing and thriving. The traumas of abandonment and fear were being overcome with the love and stability he now had. A year after their first meeting in the Safeway parking lot, Michael organized a small party to celebrate. He invited Mrs. Dorothy, who had become a surrogate grandmother to Ethan, and a few other friends. "Ethan, do you remember when we met at the supermarket?" Michael asked. "I do, Uncle Michael. It was the saddest and happiest day of my life at the same time," Ethan replied with the wisdom of his experiences. "Why?" Michael asked, curious. "It was the saddest, because I thought Dad had abandoned me. But it was the happiest because that's when you became my family too," Ethan explained. Robert Wilson listened to the conversation with teary eyes. The boy had matured a lot through his experiences, but kept the purity and love that had always defined him. "Michael, sometimes I think Ethan came into your life to teach you about unconditional love," Robert Wilson said. "And you came into my life to show me that family is a choice we make every day," replied Michael. During the party, Ethan showed the guests a drawing he had made at school. It was a picture of himself, Robert Wilson, and Michael, all holding hands under a bright sun. "This is my drawing of my family," Ethan explained proudly. Mrs. Dorothy looked at the drawing and said, "Ethan, what a beautiful drawing. You really are a very special family." "Yes, Grandma Dorothy, a family that chose each other," Ethan said. The party went on late into the night, filled with stories, laughter, and lots of emotion. Ethan fell asleep in Michael's lap, while the adults talked about how their lives had changed that year. "Robert Wilson, do you regret adopting Ethan when he was little?" Michael asked. "Never. Ethan is the best thing that ever happened to me. Even with all the struggles, all the fears, I wouldn't trade a single moment with him," Robert Wilson answered. "And you, Michael, do you regret getting involved in our story?" Robert Wilson asked. "Not at all. You taught me that life has purpose when we choose to love and help each other," Michael replied. 2 years later, life continued peacefully and happily. Ethan was now 10 years old, a bright, affectionate boy who told all his school friends that Michael was his favorite uncle. Robert Wilson had earned an important promotion at work and was taking night classes to further improve his career prospects. Michael helped him study whenever he could. "Michael, none of this would have been possible without you," Robert Wilson said one evening as they studied together. "Robert Wilson, you always had this strength inside you. You just needed the chance to show it," Michael answered. Ethan listened from the kitchen where he was doing his homework. Even at 10, he understood how much Michael had done for their family. "Uncle Michael, when I grow up, I want to be just like you," Ethan said, appearing in the living room. "What do you mean, Ethan?" Michael asked. "I want to help families who are struggling, like you helped us," Ethan explained. Michael's heart warmed at the thought that Ethan had developed such gratitude and a desire to help others. Ethan, you already help so many people just by being who you are. Your love and joy make a difference in people's lives, Michael said. That Christmas, Ethan insisted on giving handmade gifts to Michael and Robert Wilson. For his father, he made a photo frame with a picture of the three of them together. For Michael, he drew a picture of him dressed as an angel with the words, "My guardian angel," written underneath. Ethan, this is the most beautiful gift I've ever received, Michael said, touched. It's true, Uncle Michael. You showed up like an angel that day at the supermarket, Ethan replied. Robert Wilson watched the scene with deep gratitude. His life had changed completely since that cold day in the parking lot. Ethan was safe, happy, and growing up in an environment of love and stability. Michael, you know you changed our story forever, right? Robert Wilson said. Robert Wilson, you changed mine too. You taught me that the real richness in life comes from the relationships we build, Michael answered. Ethan ran to hug them both at the same time, forming a group embrace full of love and gratitude. I love you, Ethan said, simple and sincere. We love you too, son, Robert Wilson and Michael replied in unison. 3 years after their first meeting, Ethan was now 11 and one of the top students in his class. He had developed a special talent for drawing and dreamed of becoming an illustrator when he grew up. Michael had officially become Ethan's godfather in a symbolic ceremony they held at their neighborhood church. It wasn't legally necessary, but emotionally it meant a great deal to everyone. Robert Wilson had finished his technical course and earned a promotion to supervisor. Now he made enough to provide a comfortable life for Ethan and even help other families in need. Daddy, can I tell you something? Ethan asked one evening. Of course, son. You can tell me anything, Robert Wilson replied. I was thinking maybe we could help other kids like Uncle Michael helped us, Ethan said. Robert Wilson was surprised by his son's maturity. What do you mean, Ethan? He asked. Like, if we see a lost kid or someone in trouble, we can help them too, Ethan explained. Robert Wilson smiled, proud of the generosity Ethan was developing. Of course we can, son. Helping others is one of the most important things we can do in life, Robert Wilson agreed. This conversation became reality a few months later, when Ethan found a schoolmate crying in the yard because his parents were getting divorced and he was scared. Ethan talked to the boy, offered friendship, and later told Robert Wilson and Michael about the situation. The three of them decided to invite the classmate to join them for some activities, offering emotional support during a tough time. Ethan, you're turning into an amazing person, Michael said, watching how the boy cared for his friend. I learned from you that when someone's in need, we help, Ethan replied simply. 5 years had passed since that cold night in the parking lot. Ethan was now 13, a responsible and kind teenager. Robert Wilson had managed to buy his own apartment, a dream that had once seemed impossible during those hard times. Michael remained a constant and beloved presence in the family. He had become not just a friend, but truly a member of the family. Uncle Michael, do you remember exactly what you thought when you saw me crying at the supermarket? Ethan asked during a dinner conversation. I do, Ethan. I thought you were a kid who needed help and that I couldn't just walk by and pretend I hadn't seen you, Michael answered. Did you ever imagine our lives would become so close? Ethan asked. I never could have imagined. I thought I'd help you solve a problem and then we'd all go our separate ways. I never dreamed I'd gain a family, Michael said, moved. Robert Wilson listened with a full heart. The fear and despair of those difficult days felt so distant now. Michael, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped to help Ethan that day, Robert Wilson said. I'd rather not think about that, Robert Wilson. What matters is everything worked out. And now we have this beautiful family we built together, Michael replied. Ethan smiled, satisfied with the answer. Even as a teenager, he kept the gratitude and warmth that had always defined him. You know I tell our story to all my friends, right? Ethan said. Do you? Michael asked, curious. I do. I say Uncle Michael is my guardian angel who showed up when we needed him most. My friends are always impressed, Ethan shared. And what do you say about your dad? Michael asked. I say Daddy is the bravest man I know, that he went through huge struggles but never gave up on me, Ethan said, looking at Robert Wilson with admiration. Robert Wilson was deeply moved by his son's words. Every hard moment, every fear, every struggle had been worth it to reach this point of happiness and gratitude. On a special evening, 6 years after their first meeting, the three of them went to dinner at the same restaurant where they had celebrated the official adoption. Ethan had grown so much, Robert Wilson was fulfilled in his career, and Michael had found his life's purpose. "Can you believe it's been 6 years since we met?" Michael asked. "It feels like yesterday, and at the same time it feels like you've always been part of my life," said Ethan. "For me, these have been the happiest 6 years of my life," said Robert Wilson. "For me too," Michael agreed. Ethan raised his glass of soda. "A toast to our family," he said. "To our family," Robert Wilson and Michael replied, raising their glasses as well. That night, as they walked back home, Ethan asked something he had often wondered. "Uncle Michael, do you think things happen by chance or for a reason?" "Why do you ask?" Michael said. "Because it feels like you were meant to be at that Safeway on that exact day to find me," Ethan explained. Michael thought for a moment before answering. "Ethan, I believe good things happen when we choose to be kind to others. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was coincidence. What matters is that I chose to help. Your father chose to trust, and you chose to accept help," Michael said. "So it was a choice?" Ethan asked. "It was love, Ethan. Everything that happened to us was because of love," Michael replied. Ethan smiled, satisfied with the answer. At 13, he already understood that love wasn't just a feeling, but also a choice made every day. "Then let's keep choosing to love each other forever," Ethan said. "Forever," Robert Wilson and Michael agreed. As they walked through the illuminated streets of the neighborhood they now called home, the three reflected on the incredible journey they had shared. From a chance meeting in a cold parking lot, a true family had been born, built not by blood, but by the daily choice to love, care for, and protect one another. Ethan would grow up knowing that family is about being there in tough times, about choosing to stay when it would be easier to leave, about turning strangers into loved ones through kindness and generosity. Robert Wilson learned that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness, but of wisdom, that accepting love from others doesn't diminish our dignity, it multiplies our capacity to love. Michael discovered that sometimes in helping others, we find what we didn't even know we were searching for, that a simple act of kindness can change not only the life of the person receiving help, but also the life of the one who helps. 7 years after that meeting in the icy parking lot, life continued with its happy routines and everyday challenges. Ethan was in high school, a responsible young man with excellent grades who still dreamed of becoming an illustrator. Robert Wilson had been promoted to manager at his company and was engaged to Amanda, a teacher he'd met at Ethan's school. She loved Ethan as if he were her own son and got along wonderfully with Michael. Michael had met Sarah, a psychologist who worked with vulnerable families. They had been dating for 2 years and she too had naturally become part of the family. "Uncle Michael, when are you and Aunt Sarah getting married?" Ethan asked during a Sunday lunch. "Ethan!" Robert Wilson exclaimed, laughing at his son's spontaneity. "It's a fair question," Michael chuckled. "Sarah and I have actually been thinking about it." "And when you have kids, will they be my cousins?" Ethan asked excitedly. "If that happens, they'll absolutely be your cousins, Ethan," Michael replied. Ethan was thrilled at the possibility of their family growing even bigger. Even as a teenager, he kept the enthusiasm and warmth that always defined him. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave your sincere words in the comments. Do you believe true love can transform lives like it did for Ethan, Robert Wilson, and Michael? We'd love to read your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like the video and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other heartwarming stories.